it was common knowledge that you can take a mirror or a reflective surface and put it in a darkened room by candlelight, and that you go through thought, you think about the loved one who had died and all. And then you gaze in the mirror, and this is going to sound astonishing, but it's been proven many times. You can, like your dead relatives will come. Many times they emerge from the mirror, or you may yourself, your consciousness may go through the mirror. You know, I talk to God every day. He's never said a word to me about religion. You know, and people with these near-death experiences, God doesn't put them into a, doesn't give them a
A
theological exam
category.
when they die.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intelligent Soul. This is Holly Hall. I've got the most amazing guest. I've been so excited. Believe it or not, I read this gentleman's book when I was a teenager because my
Oh,
mother was reading it, and I kind of skimmed through it, and it made me think of life after death. Most of you know I'm fascinated with near-death experiences, and I've got Dr. Raymond Moody. He's in the house. How are you doing?
I
And how are
have.
you?
I'm doing great, and thank you for this invitation, and thanks to all the people listening in too.
Well, I know everyone's going to be fascinated with your story. And, I've been listening to several of your other interviews recently,
Mhm.
and I was just listening to one, and I did not realize the doctor part is that you were educated in forensic psychology,
Psychiatry, yeah. First, I got
psychiatry.
a PhD in philosophy. I was a philosophy professor, but I'm from a law enforcement family. I'd always been interested in homicide. So I went
Oh.
back to medical school with the intention of eventually being in forensic psychiatry. So I got to talk to plenty of the folks like you read about in the National Enquirer, who, in one case, ground their parents up in a meat grinder, you know, just murder
Wow.
people with
You must have.
axes. I mean, it was just like living in another dimension, Holly. People used to think, well, why are you doing this when you could be sitting in an office talking with neurotics who are not nearly as bad off as you are?
Yeah.
And I said, well, because this is just like living in another dimension. You get any one day I could talk to 15 or 20 people who were living in some other world. It was fascinating.
Wow. And so what did you find fascinating about, like, I don't think many people have ever heard of course psychiatry, yes, but forensic psychiatry.
Forensic psychiatry, it's a, back when I was doing it, it wasn't as formalized um, uh, specialty it is as it is today. I was just there because, curiosity. I wanted to help these people as much as you could, and then also I just, what in the world makes somebody kill somebody was what I wanted to know.
Yeah. So what made them tick? And that would be interesting that you also majored in or got your degree in philosophy. And that's quite
That's right.
interesting because I didn't finish my schooling, but that was my major and my minor was psychology and philosophy.
All
And
right, terrific,
and
terrific.
philosophy was the one that I found more interested. I actually flipped it.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, now I'm going to major in philosophy and minor in psychology, but I didn't finish my schooling, but that's okay. I found philosophy it should be in every school system because it really makes you think outside of the
yeah.
box,
There
right?
you go. It does.
You
That's right.
know,
I just thank God all the time that I chose to go into philosophy. It's been, I read Plato's Phaedo. I don't know if you ever came across that one, but
yeah,
when I was 18 years old, I had already read The Republic and
that's what
found
we
out
had to read
about
was the
near death
Republic.
experiences because
Yeah.
that's the Republic is about a near death experience. And then I found the Phaedo in October of 62, and I was hooked. That one book, which is about life after death, has sort of shaped the whole course of my life.
I was just going to say, so now we're going to segue. This what led you to start? Because did you have a near-death experience yourself?
Now, what happened,
Not that I could find.
Holly, that thank God for the fact that my dad was hostile to religion. I was born in Porterdale, Georgia, Dad was a surgeon and a professional military officer. Okay, in your mind, put those two personalities together. Plus, he had been a medic in World War II in the Pacific Theater. And to me, I just really, it was just part of the scenery. But Dad was always kind of scoffed about religion and stuff when I was real little. And my grandma Waddleton that was one of her favorite subjects of gentle humor was religion. So to me, that wasn't, I never regarded religion as a serious pursuit. I was interested in well, mainly astronomy. I went to UVA to study astronomy, but immediately, as you can understand, why I got whisked away into philosophy. And so when I went to medical school, when I went to college, Holly, I really didn't understand that the notion of an afterlife, that anybody took it seriously. My my contact with it was in the New Yorker cartoons about the clouds and the gates. And I thought it was like something from the cartoon, or my Aunt Edna took me to a Jack Benny movie when I was a kid about the clouds and the angels or something. But I always thought it was just humor. But that was a real wake up call when Plato was already my hero the first couple of pages I read of him. And when it gets to the end, that he was serious about this experience of a man who had apparently died and left his body and went into another world and so on. And I also found out that semester that another Greek philosopher, Democritus, had also discussed these experiences. And he was an atomist, and his take on this was that what happens is that when somebody appears to be dead but is revived, he said that when you look at the body, it may be dead, but he said on the on the invisible level, there's still these reactions going on, which is still the debate today. Is it real, or is it oxygen deprivation to the brain? And so that's how I got hooked on it. And then in 1965, I met the biggest influence on my life in a way, Dr. George Ritchie, this terrific psychiatry professor who had this experience himself at Camp Berkeley, Texas in December 1943, when he was a recruit in the Army doing his basic training. And he developed double lobar pneumonia and was dead apparently 9 minutes and had this phenomenal experience. I heard it in 1965, and because Dr. Ritchie talked to students and such. Well, in 1976, March to be exact, I learned from my dad, who was from Portugal, Georgia. Mom and dad were from Portugal, Georgia. I Dad had heard a tape of Dr. Ritchie's experience, and he said the following words. He said, George Ritchie, Camp Berkeley, Texas, December 1943. I was there, and so were you. What happened was my mom and dad had moved to Camp Berkeley in early September so my dad could go to officers candidate school. George's experience, I was conceived in late September. George's experience was December 20th. Mom and dad moved away from Camp Berkeley on December 29th. I was there in utero when this experience took place that changed my life. It gets more weird after that. I mean, I had these continual series of amazing things where George would just sort of appear out of nowhere and changed my life. It happened many times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we
So
need
that's
one of
how
your
I got
books to be
started.
your life story. That's your next book. I'm predicting it right now.
Well, my next book is on the way. It's called Swan Song, because I'm 80 years old. I almost died 3 years ago. It's been hard to recover. So I see it coming. So I'm getting all my thoughts about all of my work in order to put out a final volume here in about a year.
So your shared, this was one of the things that fascinated me as well, shared death experience, or SDE. And
Yeah.
not a couple of years ago, I don't know if it was a podcast I was listening to, but this person had specialized in this, that he would, because he had a shared death experience, and he helped the person cross over. And then he became kind of like a death doula, doing this for other people. And
Oh,
he would get
interesting.
out of
Yeah.
his body while the other person was
Oh,
passing,
interesting.
and he would help them move.
Yeah.
But I know yours isn't quite like that. But can you explain this to the listeners? What is an SDE?
Yeah, it's I think probably everybody listening to this knows about near-death experiences, right? That
Yeah.
when they appear to be dead, people actually say they leave their body, they see their resuscitation scene from above, they pass through a passageway into another world, they come into a beautiful light with love and peace, they meet relatives and friends of theirs who've already died who are there to meet them. They
Yeah.
undergo panoramic memory in which they see everything they've ever done in display, often in the company of a being of complete light and love who sort of guides them through this. And then they come back to their life and they're transformed. And everybody's heard that story.
Yeah.
And we can kind of deal with that because there's a way of thinking about it, right? Some say, oh, it's oxygen deprivation to the brain. Other people say, no, this is real. Okay. The shared death experience has put a monkey wrench into that whole system because shared death experiences are identically the same phenomenon, right, as near death experiences. But they occur not to somebody who almost dies and is revived, but rather to bystanders there at the death of someone else who, as the person died, the bystanders have these near what we think of as near death experiences. For example, they may say, as grandma died, I myself got out of my body, and I went part way toward this light with her. People will say that as somebody is in the room dying, that deceased loved ones of the dying person will come in apparitional form as though to take them away. People say the room fills with light. And I got plenty of cases where the bystanders say they empathically co-lived the dying life review of the person who passes away. And I always assumed that it had to be somebody who was very close. Like the first couple I had were women in their 40s who had lost their teenage sons, who, as
Mm.
their sons were dying, they had these visions of the son's life. But then, then it gets to be a woman I met in Carrollton, Georgia, who was there with her husband, who, as he was dying, she saw his whole life review around him. Things like that. But then some years ago, the emergency room physician got in touch with us and said that he was called to the ER to resuscitate a patient he had never laid eyes on. And he said, as this guy was dying, he saw the guy's life review just sort of come up around it. This and these things are, it's kind of people don't want to hear this because there's no framework. See, if it's just a near death experience, we've got this framework we can fall back on, but we don't have any way of thinking about this if it's the bystanders are having
Yeah.
the same experience.
Yeah, I agree. And the last interview I listened to is you brought up God, which is kind of prominent in my conversations with some family members right now. And what I love that you said is that the one thing that was common is that if they met with a God or Jesus, the Bible wasn't brought up, scriptures weren't
That's right.
brought up, religion, there
That's
was no
right.
religion that was brought up. Can
That's right.
you go a little bit further on that discovery? That was quite common
Yeah,
across the board.
I'm 80, and I'm just finished with politeness. You know what I mean, Holly? And I gotta say, this 14% of the population who's into Jesus, 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 and is telling the rest of us we're going to hell. That's baloney. And these people they don't know what they're talking about. Their whole view of life is they're so terrified to say, I don't know, that they've got to get some sort of ideology, and that's just nonsense. So, I talk to God every day. He's never said a word to me about religion, and people with these near-death experiences, God doesn't put them doesn't give them a theological exam
category.
when they die.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're
It's
Protestant,
not
you go to
about the
that light.
Bible.
You're Jewish, you go to that light.
There you go. There you go. Or
No.
now it's got to be, okay, are you coming with Jesus or with Jesus? I mean, there's a big difference there. And so anyway, religion to me is it's social, is all it is. When somebody tells you, I believe Jesus is such and such, that's nothing to do with belief in the logical sense. What that has to do with is when you say, I believe that Jesus such and such, that is an act of coherence. And it's what is somebody saying then is that I'm with this group over here and y'all are going to hell, but it's just nonsense. But I love God, and I figure if I talked to him every day, if he had wanted me to be religious, he would have said something by now.
Yeah.
And I put all this stuff together in a book that I published on Amazon by myself. It's called God is Bigger Than the Bible. And, the
Oh, I've got
people
to
who
look at
talk
that
about the
one.
Bible, let's put it this way. These, how a lot of them dress kind of like in the 30s with that, and a couple of very distinguished looking gentlemen came by a few weeks ago. And I had just been reading this book about Athanasius, who was the guy who compounded the Bible. See, there used to be just lots of loose sheets and scrolls and Jewish and Christian scriptures, but then they invented what we call the Codex, the ancestor of today's book, where they learned to bind the papyrus in signatures and then stack them up and make a book. And there was a technological limit on how big the book could get. So Athanasius has to go through all of this stuff, and he's got to be the one to put it down. Now, how did he do that, right? So I was fascinated by this, and I mentioned to these two gentlemen who came in, they wanted to talk to me about the Bible. Well, sure, I don't know much about the Bible. Come on in. But I just read that book, and they became offended and walked out. People don't want to know this whole Bible thing is a way people have of just being, insecure and trying to pound everybody else with it. It's become a bludgeon that people use, and they don't know anything about it. I mean, I've never even read the Bible, but from the little I do know, I can tell that when I ask these people who allegedly know about the Bible, they're just as ignorant as I am. It's just stupid. What I say is, God is my friend, and God doesn't put you to a Bible test when you die.
And he's not, yeah, and there's no judgment day. There's no real judgment around that.
The
And I
judgment
hear
comes
you.
from yourself.
Right.
That's what people say. It's like, I saw this, I wish I hadn't done it. Right.
So when people do pass on a common story and then they come back, a common story is that they feel this blissful they're overwhelmed with love, this essence of love. Some see Jesus, some feel the presence of God, some see angels, some see loved ones, but it seems like a common theme is this overwhelming feeling of love and bliss.
Yes, yes. And love, Holly, that is so far beyond anything we experience in this life that, as they say, there are no words for it. And George Ritchie, this first person living person I knew about having his experience, he said, this being knew everything about me, he said, and yet still loved me totally.
And many people come back changed.
Oh, yeah.
They're
Yeah,
not the
the
same again.
changes are really profound. And mostly I have seen this because it's like mostly I knew these people after their experience, right? But then I would have to depend on what the people who knew them before said.
Yeah.
But one time in my life, I saw somebody before and after.
Oh,
Back in about 1980, I was doing my internal medicine training at a hospital, and I met this young woman, a very nice young woman who was having a platelet problem, and she was pregnant, and so I was there with the hematologist who were trying to get her platelet problem under control before the delivery. And then I had, really nice, met her, a very nice person. But then then I'm off on my rotation, right? And then I'm gone on to another rotation. And the original doctor, was still there though. But so anyway, like 3 or 4 years later, I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria in the middle of the night. I was on call for psychiatry. And all of a sudden, Holly, this angelic presence floated in. I know it sounds bizarre, but this woman came in. Now, when I met this woman 3 years before, she was very nice, but it was kind of, she was, I don't know, just there wasn't much depth, right? Suddenly, I had this young woman came in and plopped down beside me, and she said, "Dr. Moody, you don't remember me, but 3 years ago, I was in the hospital and I was pregnant." And she said, "After you left," she said, "I delivered and I had a cardiac arrest during the delivery." And she said she had this near death experience. And she said, when she was telling the nurses about it, she said, "Well, that Dr. Moody here was there the other day. He's into this." So, but the transformation was just indescribable. She looked totally different.
wow.
I've never seen anything so startling in the way of a change in anybody in my life. So, that's the one that I knew before and after. But, a lot of people tell me the same thing. Yeah,
They're
I
changed
didn't
after.
know before they had their experience.
I have to tell you a little bit of a story. I've not had near death experience, but my husband did. Just before I met him, actually, like literally just like a week or so before. And he's not a religious person. He's not a spiritual person. He's not woo woo. There's nothing. It actually didn't really make a profound change. So he's
Mm-hmm.
your everyday Joe who had this experience and maintained his everyday joke
Yeah.
personality. So to me, this is even more proof that it happens, that
Yeah.
um, his heart stopped. They never found any reason why after his heart stopped. That he was in the middle of a divorce.
Scary.
So I said to him, "You had a broken heart." But they didn't find anything physically wrong with him after. But he went above his body while they were about to put paddles on him.
Mm-hmm.
And just before they put the paddles on him, he went back into his body. But he did see the
Yeah.
light. He
Yeah.
did see his brother who had passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And he heard his brother who was still on earth telling him not to
Yeah.
go to the light, who had no idea he was in the hospital or anything. Nobody
Yeah.
really knew because it happened so
I know.
quickly. Yeah. And
It
then he came
quickly
back in his
gets
body again.
quickly gets incomprehensible. I've known thousands of people who've been through this, and a funny thing is happening, um, in that the afterlife is beginning to infuse in this life. Think about it. It's near-death experiences always occurred. They occurred in remote antiquity, but they were few and far between. Right? It was extraordinarily rare for
Hmm.
somebody who almost died to survive.
Hmm.
But now what happened was in the 60s and the advent of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, right? Now there's one of those defibrillators in every department store, on every
Yeah.
floor, right? And so with that came this mass wave of people who have had these experiences that formerly were very rare. And so it's so much so that I would venture to say that probably virtually everybody knows somebody who's had that experience, right? And what that means is that this life is now full of people who are connected to the afterlife. as
Oh,
your
yeah.
husband might mention. It's like it's. I heard George Ritchie say many times. He said many, and others as well. But you know that there's a certain kind of nostalgia that you get that after you have this experience and you are you know, so affected by it that you're just never the same, and that you always have that connection with the afterlife. There's always that kind of longing or
Right.
nostalgia for it.
So you now have a clear understanding that there is a heaven, there is an afterlife. We go somewhere that's pleasant and comfortable, and it doesn't matter what kind of lifestyle that you've had or religion or whatnot. This place exists, and it's quite common
What
with
I would say is, I
everyone.
can't say I have a clear understanding of it. Where I have is, I just give up, Holly. I mean, you know, I am
Surrender.
a skeptic in the real sense. Those morons who, I'm a skeptic about these near death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. That is a moron talking to you, because what that moron has just shown you that he's never looked up the word skeptic. The skeptical movement was formed after Aristotle codified logic in the Hellenistic period by Pyrrho, the Pyrrho. He was the founder of the skeptical movement. And at that time, there wasn't a clear distinction between the spiritual quest and the intellectual quest. So Pyrrho knew logic very, very well. And if you think of logic, it's a system for generating conclusions from premises, right? So what Pyrrho said was, well, what if we really bear down, we ask every question, but in the end, then this is the essence of skepticism. You refrained from drawing a conclusion. All right, that's what it means. Because they realized, number one, if they kept doing it, that it really does expand your mind. If you keep sort of not holding back on everything, your mind expands. Plus, if you think about it geometrically and everybody is rushing in this direction to get to the conclusion, but your technique is to avoid a conclusion, you see side pathways of inquiry everybody else is missed because they're focused on the conclusion. Now, with that knowledge, run that back through what you hear of these utter morons, many of whom are just entertainers that you see on TV. Oh, I'm a skeptic about these near death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. Is I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such. But that doesn't mean that it's a very easy thing to conclude about the afterlife.
Hmm.
It's still a very difficult. And by the way, Pyrrho went to with Alexander the Great to India. And when he got over there, he consorted with the Buddhists in India. And when he came back to Greece, he was a Buddhist. He perambulated and he meditated. And I wonder how much these
Interesting.
so-called skeptics would be appreciative of the fact that you know, their title came from this guy who was a Buddhist. Well, they're just too dumb to, you know, to compute something like that. But
I,
um, what
I want
I
to thank you.
mean
I want to
here
thank
is
you. I want to thank
that
you for
I give
reminding
up.
me. Sorry, go ahead.
I give up. I give up. It's like I don't. I realize that you can't draw a logical conclusion about life after death. But what I say is I give up. I just can't think my way out of it. And so, I mean, what else can I say?
Yeah.
It's one of the uh, experiences I heard that really had a big impact on me was there's this wonderful guy named Jeff O'Driscoll, who's was one of the early people in emergency medicine. He's an emergency medicine doctor. And some years ago, there was a guy who came in from the highway, apparently dead, with his leg chopped off, who had been in a terrible accident, a car accident, in which his wife was instantly killed. One of his children, but I think one survived. So they brought Jeff Olson into the hospital, and Jeff O'Driscoll the ER doctor came into the place where I guess Jeff Olson was surrounded by wires and tubes and had a conversation with Jeff Olson's wife, who was dead. And, I give up. I give up. I give up. I mean, I've heard dozens of stories like that. I can't think my way out of it. And it's still very counterintuitive to me, the notion of an afterlife. But I mean, I give up. It's
Yeah.
not, I wouldn't try to persuade anybody else of that, but
And
that's just,
that often happens that the more like if you have a research investigative personality, which you do, there and when I do astrology charts, I can usually clearly see that somebody has this type of uh curiosity about life.
mm,
Is that the more you know, the more you don't know,
yeah, exactly.
right?
I like what Bernard of Clairvaux said. He said, some seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and that is curiosity. Some seek knowledge to be known, and that is vanity. And
Mm.
some seek knowledge to help others, and that is love. And I've been firmly over in the first. The second one has never appealed to me because I a big event to me was at the age of 7 or 8, looking through a telescope and seeing another galaxy. And I realized I'm never going to know much of anything, and that's all right. But in a way, it makes the knowledge you do have even more precious. So, but then I think, the people who are in the second category to me are just jerks. But the
Yeah.
third category is neat. And
Yeah.
that is, my wife is like that.
Hmm.
She wants, and when she's learned something new, she wants to, her idea is to help others. My friend George Ritchie was like that too. He used to read all these books. Why, George, why are you reading that? And I finally realized that, what he does, he doesn't read anything that except stuff that he thinks will enable him to help people.
And there is nothing wrong. You reminded me when I was 21, I said I was a skeptic as well. And my friend, I was saying how my family, I come from a family of intuitives and psychics and everything, and I didn't feel that way because I had a bit of a scientific mind. And he goes, "Oh, here's a book on astrology." I actually read it as a skeptic because I was going to read the whole thing and tell him that it was hogwash. And I became fascinated with it and I could see truth in it. And I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And then recently, somebody had sent me a video to tell me that, being an astrologer is not the most Christian thing to do. And they said,
Mm.
listen to this video. So I did. I painfully watched the entire thing. And,
Oh my God.
and I could probably have and this is the art of being a philosopher as well. When you are looking at all other options, including the ones that you don't even know exist, right?
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah.
true philosopher. Now,
Yeah.
I was reading your book that you wrote in 1975, and that's your first book that became a hit. And in it, you said humanity is on the verge of a radical shift in this impasse. So, what did you mean by the impasse? How long is the impasse? When did it start? And how did you know this?
Well, I don't remember that passage specifically, but what I say is this, that because this experience is becoming infused in a whole new way in this world, that it's like everybody knows somebody, that has to create some kind of shift in the way we think about things. And see, as a philosopher, you might remember David Hume, right? Well, David Hume was the great skeptic who he lived from 1711 to 1776, to place him. He was Scottish. And Hume said in his essay that he would not allow to be published until he was dead.
Oh.
Because I guess even in Scotland, you might be burned at the stake for something like this. But he said, by the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Now, there's an understatement.
Wow.
And then he went on to say, some new species of logic is requisite for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. And what he was getting at, which is perfectly true, is that basically the notion of an afterlife is a self-contradiction. And self-contradiction is not computed by normal logic, right? And so the real fact is, no matter how much anybody protests, the real fact is that the notion of an afterlife, although it certainly brings good feelings or images, it has no cognitive content. That is, there's no way to put it in a verification framework or something, right? Well, but then so have a lot of other things over the centuries seemed that way, completely unknowable. And so what I'm saying is that the essential problem relating to the proof of life after death has been solved, which is that we now have a logic that can take care of the problem that Hume rightly points out. That and that applying that new logic, we can actually prepare people in advance so that when subsequently they have a near-death experience, they will be able to articulate it in an entirely new way. It's already happened at least once that I know of. Now, what this means is, about the things that we supposedly couldn't know for thousands of years. If you go back just a few hundred years, the very idea that you could know about clouds was just an absurdity. And even going back to antiquity, because clouds are ephemeral and changeable and constantly shifting and unintelligible. So because of that symbolic impact of it, people just didn't even think about it. There's no way we can know about clouds. That was clear to everybody until then. This guy in the late 18th century, his name was Luke Howard, and he was a pharmacist. And at that time, there was not science as you and I know it. At that time, there were these hobbyist clubs. And they had many of them were wealthy and could afford equipment, and they would conduct their own experiments in their house, and then they would join these clubs where they would read papers to each other. And so Luke Howard his job took him back and forth. So looking out the window of the carriage and all at clouds, he thought, oh my God, there's different types of them. There's the big cottony ones, the cumulus. Then there are the stratus, the layered ones. Then there's the cirrus, the little feather ones, then the nimbus. And he wrote a paper on that. You learned it in the 7th or 8th grade as I did, right? Yeah. And it's obvious to us, but when he printed that paper, it created a sensation. And the reason is that anybody who was, had enough energy to waddle outside and look up in the sky could see it for themselves. See it, it brought its own confirmation. Yeah. What I'm saying right now, and it's going to be hard in a brief kind, but what I want to make here is a bold statement that, we have solved the problem that Hume pointed out. And but as well as I do, Holly, that most of the people who are into this, it's all about storytelling, right? And I love stories too. I've heard thousands. I can't wait to hear the next story. And at the same time, even if you had a bazillion stories, that wouldn't add up to a rational proof of an afterlife. But we now have a way around that. But it's not going to catch hold with the people who are just into the storytelling side of it, see? As I've done this many times, Plato said, even if we had an infinite number of these stories, we still need some set of concepts to establish the connection between the stories and the statement there's an afterlife. And there's just not enough, there are not many people who are going to want to sit there and follow concepts because they're there to hear stories. See, but it's what I'm getting at here. The proof the real obstacle now to the rational comprehension of the afterlife is no longer logical or conceptual. It is now psychological. And it has to do with the great majority of people who are interested in the afterlife. They're not going to want to sit still and follow a set of concepts. What they want to hear is a story. And but there are enough people around who do like to follow concepts. I've been doing this workshop for, well, a long time, but anyway, where I guide people through this process, and knowing full well that eventually somebody who went through this process was going to have a near-death experience and would be able to put it to us in a whole new way. Because, people with near-death experiences, no matter how articulate they are, I just have no words for it, right? Is what they
Yeah.
say, that it's inevitable, ineffable. But anyway, some years ago, this guy who took my seminar subsequently had developed H1N1, was in the hospital, I think, for 60 days. As I recall, had 3 cardiac arrests, wasn't able to eat for 60 days. And anyway, he was calling to tell me about his near-death experience, and it was very weak. But in the midst of this, he was, by the way, he's a physicist or a scientist and also an artist, a sculptor, and I believe a physicist. He worked with the Bell of the Bell firm. But anyway, he said, Raymond, he said, when his experience, he said, Raymond, when I was over there, he said, my mind went back to your seminar, and he said, I saw what you're saying is true. He said that you can't comprehend how that world is connected to this world unless, as he put it, you take the unintelligibility axis into account. And what that means is, as much as we may have these feelings and images, that, as I said, cognitively, the sentence, there is life after death, doesn't convey any, because it's a self-contradiction. But that's all right. Lots of things have been regarded as unknowable, like clouds, right? Well,
Yeah.
another thing that was long regarded as impossible to know was the distance to the fixed stars. As people say, you could never know that. Then in 1838, I think it was, the measurements got close enough or accurate enough so that, realizing as they did that it's 186 million miles across the orbit of the Earth around the sun, they realized if you take a measurement here of a nearby star, wait exactly 6 months and take a measurement here, then this distance across here. So that gives you the distance out there.
That's Kepler.
And the first one they did is, I may be wrong, but I think it was 61 Cygni. The star was the first one they measured the parallax on. Well, now you see we have an equivalent method with the near-death experiences. We already have lots and lots of accounts of near-death experiences that are viewed through the lens of Aristotelian logic, which makes it a travel narrative, right? Mm-hmm. I got out of my body. I went through a tunnel into a light. I saw my deceased relatives. I saw my life pass in review. I returned to my body, and I came back to life. That's a travel narrative, right? But just a minute here. What they say is, number one, there are no words. And secondly, it was not in space, right? It was not in space. And secondly, it was not in time. No time passed. What meaning does a travel narrative have?
Yeah.
When there's no time and space. It's like Lincoln, when he was president, and I forgot the exact occasion, but it was a very formal state ceremony. And everybody was gathered around, and his part called for him to mount a horse and to lead a procession away from the scene. But when Lincoln got up on the horse put its own back hoof in the stirrup, and the horse was bouncing around. Everybody was shocked into silence. Poor Mr. President. So, whereupon Lincoln just looked down at the horse and said, well, if you're getting on, I'm getting off. And people just dissolve into laughter because it's a very nice image. It's a
Yeah.
very vivid image, but it's nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And when somebody knows that they've lapsed into nonsense and they are in a clear state of consciousness, they will correct it. For example, the coach says, "You guys pair up in threes." Hey, just a minute here, coach. Pair up means twos, right?
Yeah.
He may, presumably he will say, "Oh, I get it." So then he will correct his error, right?
Mhm.
And to make it intelligible. Well, the same thing is happening now with near death experiences. People who are going into this with these already having these new ideas about how to talk about things that don't make sense. That as they accumulate, see, as we get more and more of these new kinds of accounts that are articulated through a view that people have this extra logical equipment, that's going to give us parallax. See, by comparing these ones we already have with the ones we'll have in the future, there will be a little difference. We don't know what the difference is yet, but there will be. So, what that will enable us to do is to get a closer fix on the afterlife. I mean, it's already happened.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, basically what you're saying is it's becoming science. There is scientific proof. And there was a movie, I forget, it was a sci-fi movie, but it was where people would force themselves into a near-death experience so that
Uh,
they could experience it. And I wonder maybe in the future, I mean, there are some psychedelics where people feel like they've died and they've seen other things and
yeah.
beings. There are yeah, so that's really that's that's
Yeah. And
fascinating.
also, I think that science, I think that what will happen probably is that this will become a scientific question. See,
Right.
it's you
Exactly.
go back to the way, as you know from your studies, see, the way science has come about is that there would be a philosophical view first. All right. Uh,
Right.
Aristotle
There's a
described
theory.
motion, right?
Yeah.
And his view of motion, there's an attraction force, and the heavier it is, the faster it goes down, and so on. Well, that was what people believed because of Aristotle's rational analysis. But then Galileo comes along and says, just a minute here. He rolled the balls down the inclined planes. The heavy ball went down at the same rate the light bulb ball did. See, so when Galileo came up with a way to fit this into an observational framework, see, then it became science. And I think that we are now, by the way, I love these people dearly, but parapsychology, that's pseudoscience. These folks, I'm sorry, they're nice, but they just don't get it. And, they're into their beliefs and all, and none of that parapsychological stuff makes any sense. But we do now have a way out of this where we can potentially bring this into an observational framework where everybody could presumably get the same result. But it requires altering our minds so that when we go into the experience, we'll be able to articulate it in a new way.
Well, the sad thing is it isn't mainstream enough. It's not in the school system. Remote viewing is a real thing. That used to be called woo-woo. But if you do the research in the 1950s, the government was practicing remote viewing.
They
They still
were,
do to this day.
they were, yeah. And I feel great with you. So let me tell you this, and you
Say it.
know, that remote viewing thing. Okay, I knew some of the major participants, and those folks they're believers. Okay, and so what I asked the people with remote viewing question was this. I don't know if you've ever heard. You're young, but this may still work. I don't know how the mores have changed, but um, suppose somebody told you that they would give you $10,000 if you could meet at a place in Paris with, say, 1,000 other people, okay, at a certain time at the same place. Okay. And each was offered $10,000 as long as they meet together at this same location, but none of them can communicate with one another about where they should meet. Question is, where should you meet?
Where should I meet?
Yeah, in other words, so say somebody told you that they're going to tell 1,000 other people the same thing. I'll give you
Go
$10,000.
somewhere in Paris.
Yeah, if you meet somewhere in Paris at a certain area, where would it be?
You know, I'd probably pick the Eiffel Tower.
There, yeah, that's what everybody said.
Yeah, because
All
it's
right.
a
Now that the
common
man who
monument.
invented that was called the Schelling, and those entities are called Schelling points. He was a economist at Harvard. And so one of these things they told me about, like the guy was telling me that they took this guy to Houston, right? And they put him in a motel room. Then they sent the other guy out just to go to anywhere you want to in Houston and beam them back, right? Well, then the receiver gets, I believe, seems like I hear a big ship or something. Where would you go to in Houston? Is the harbor, right?
Yeah.
So that's the basic fallacy of this. Now, it's what I'm getting at is that these are exciting things, but once you really think them and by the way, the idea that those people promulgated that was the military was all for this. In fact, the military was disgusted when they saw this little place they were doing this. They would go through and see all these characters and outfits, and it was not really respected. But because the government did it, there's this folklore out there, but it's all untrue. Now, I'm not saying that don't think about these things. What I'm saying is, let's think about it in some new way. It's I thought that study of the remote viewing was just so crass. I mean, they should have thought to rather than leading people down the primrose path with shelling points, they should have put some. And I asked one of them, I said, well, what about shelling points? They had no idea what shelling points were, but it was the essence of their whole technique.
Well,
So,
it makes me question. It makes me question when I work with my clients, I can actually see locations. Like, I'm not saying I'm a remote viewer, but if they were saying, I'm not getting along with my boss, what do I do? I'll describe the boss, what they wear, what their personality is, their hair color. And I don't think I'm being psychic. I think I'm
hey,
seeing
Holly,
something that
Holly,
actually
I
exists.
respect you. I
Yeah.
respect you, and that's right on. And but I don't think you were a parapsychologist.
No.
The experience you're having was in ancient Greece in the archaic age.
Yeah.
This was right before the ancient times, about
Yeah.
750 some 700 BCE. There was this guy named Hermotimus, Hermotimus, and he had the talent that you did. Right, he could leave his body at will and go to a remote location. I'm not saying that these experiences don't happen. I say that when you put it into some sort of framework where you're allegedly proving it, you've really got to think a lot more deeply than those folks did. And
Right.
this is nothing personal. I love these folks. They're just the nicest folks. But in
I
terms
can't
of
do
their
it by
thinking
will. Like, I
process,
can't do it at will. Like they say the remote viewers can do it at will. I
yeah,
can't at all. It
yeah.
just like
See, and
comes.
I've had that kind of experience myself. It's left me scratching my head. I mean, it's happened. I know it happened then,
And you
but
can't
I
find
don't think I could put it into a
what's the answer.
framework
We don't
where I
know.
could prove anybody to prove it
Yeah.
to anybody else.
I like that philosophy because we live in such a Q and A world. We live in a world where it's like, I need the answer. I need the answer. I need the answer. And there was a movie that I watched. I always forget it. Something into the galaxy, and there was a scene in there where the person basically said the question is more important than the answer. Like what it, and that's when I work with my clients. I'm like, let's forget about finding the answer. Let's be curious about the question.
That's the
And what is the
process is so
question?
fascinating.
Yeah.
It is the process. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it really is. It's a there is a logical, rational way to think about this,
And
and that
when you study Plato, that's what happens. You start to realize I mean, it's all questions. He has a question for a question, and that person, Aristotle creates a question to his question, and their whole
Yeah.
conversation is just questions. They're not really even answers. And it's
There you
fascinating.
go. See, and the logic of interrogation. I really had to learn a lot about that when I was working with psychotic killers, because
I
otherwise
bet.
I would probably have been killed. But I see then, the folks in the parapsychological establishment, they're not very cognizant about interrogation. It's it's a very complicated process, and there's about half a dozen figures of speech that are figures of interrogation, for example.
Right.
Um, like hypophora is one that there's some religion that goes by this one. It's a way of indoctrination. I've never had much experience with religion, but I remember in high school, I was talking to this guy about whatever his religion was. I don't remember. And I was asking him about his educational process, and he said, well, it was question and answer. There was a whole bunch of questions and then they had to memorize the answers to. Well, that's called hypophora, Hypophora, and it was first used by Pythagoras. And typically, it's used in a situation where you want to indoctrinate somebody rather than you want to. So, you know what I'm talking about. You have to
Yeah,
be very careful about the
I
interrogation.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Well, we want to leave the mind and the person to be free of their own thoughts and have freedom to be who they want to be and the way they want to study and what they want to believe in without it being labeled or
Yeah.
indoctrinated or you're wrong because you're not like me. You would never
There you go.
look at
There you
nature.
go.
Nature doesn't go by that kind of
Yeah,
rule.
it's like it's so fascinating. See, curiosity has driven me all my life, and if you're curious, what you really want to know is, it's like I'm so amazed, and I'm sure you are too, Holly, about how many people they think up something they want to believe, and then they create some kind of flimsy so-called reasons or arguments to reach that. But that's never any fun. The reason they
Oh,
keep on with it, see, is that they know they're fooling themselves. But if you really sit down like the skeptic does and to debate everything, to reject everything, I mean, just say no, no, no until you go through that process, then you feel so much more happy and satisfied because
right.
once you put
Question
it
it.
to a real test, then
Yeah.
you can have some degree more confidence in what you come out with.
And
So, but
that's the love part of it. If somebody comes to you or me or anybody else and says, "I'm curious, give me the answer," help them find the more
there you go.
curiosity in it.
That's
Help
right.
them find what they think is their own answer and then create more questions on top of
That's
that
right.
answer and help them find
That's right.
themselves, their own
That's right.
portal to it. And that would be the love part.
Exactly.
But not
Yeah,
loving would
that's
be,
what
okay,
that
I
was.
have the
You would
way,
have
I
been
have
a
the
great
answer. Listen to
philosophy
me.
professor. You would have been a great philosophy professor. That would have been a good thing for you to continue with because it was so gratifying. I haven't taught philosophy for quite a while now, but I still get communications from students
Well,
I had 40 years ago. It's so touching.
Well, what
It
did
is.
Plato say? All politicians should be philosophers, and all philosophers should be politicians.
Oh,
Everyone
there you
should
go.
learn philosophy to
That's right.
question.
And he also said that we'll never be happy until the office holders we have to drag them in kicking and screaming. Because he thought that the way we should do it is we should just figure out who the best people are and tell them you're drafted. And but that's
Yeah,
right.
that's a good. I have one more question before we wrap this up. Your book, Proof of Life After Life, there's
Yeah,
7 reasons to believe in afterlife, is a groundbreaking book. So
right.
my pressing question is, what happens? Like, what are at least 3 of those 7 reasons that we
Yeah,
want to believe in
yeah,
life after death?
yeah. Well, Paul Perry and I put this book together, Proof of Life After Life, and it's a great combination of a Paul was in fine arts and journalism, and journalists ask some kind of certain questions, and I come from medicine and philosophy, and I ask a different kind of questions. So what this book is, it puts those things together, and we talk about the most persuasive kind of things we know about that can give people some kind of comfort and confidence that there's an afterlife. And one of them is, Holly, is that, I hear all the time, and I'm sure you've heard that phrase, if I only had 5 more minutes, right?
Yeah.
After you lose a loved one, but they talk about it as though it couldn't be. The
Yeah.
fact is, from remote antiquity, it is fairly easy to call up your deceased relatives. The Greeks had entire institutions known as oracles of the dead, where you went to dead, not like the mediums we had today. You would have your own experience. And by studying the archaeological findings of this place, I figured out what they were doing. And it's been throughout history. Many people have understood, including our own great grandparents in as late as about 1915. It was common knowledge that you can take a mirror or a reflective surface and put it in a darkened room by candlelight, and that you go through thought, you think about the loved one who had died and all. And then you gaze in the mirror, and this is going to sound astonishing, but it's been proven many times. You can, like your dead relatives will come. Many times they emerge from the mirror, or you may yourself, your consciousness may go through the mirror, meet your relatives on the other side. This is very well known, and it's been suppressed primarily by the religious establishment who want to, somebody who does this on their own, they might come up with something that's against the
You're
ideology,
gonna
right?
burn. Yeah.
But it's easy to do. And another one is called
I'm
dream
trying it.
incubation.
I'm trying it.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's fantastic. A lot of people have replicated my work and they get the same results, including at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. They set this up. And it's and another way is called dream incubation. It's like basically you write a letter to a deceased loved one and fill out, ask all your questions and express your feelings and so on. And then you just fold up the letter and put it under your bed. And in many cases, this brings about a nighttime waking vision of the deceased. And what people say is, I have to call it a dream, but because I was asleep, but that it didn't have the quality of a dream. It was more real than real, is what people often say. That you're just there with the person.
Yes.
So it's a fairly easy thing to communicate with the dead, but it also gets to a point, Holly, where it would break down the whole system if everybody could call up the dead at any time. You see
Right?
what I mean?
Yeah.
This Wall Street, everything else is predicated on the division between this world and the next world. And so one of the things that keeps this out of the public domain is simply the fact that if everybody started acknowledging, yeah, I talked to grandma and it was a common thing, this would break down the system that we're in. It wouldn't be consistent with that. So that's why I think that this is so harshly suppressed. That,
Yeah.
but it's rediscovered.
They
My
don't want us
favorite.
that powerful.
Yeah, that's right. My favorite story about this. See, this has been episodically rediscovered after the church condemned it in about 400. But it keeps popping up because it happens, right? And there was this guy named John Dee, D-E-E. He lived from 1527 to 1608, I think it was. He was a contemporary of Queen Elizabeth and Shakespeare. And John Dee was an eminent man of learning. He studied uh, Euclid's geometry. He brought it back into Europe with a fresh preface. He was a pioneer in the special effects in the theater. He was, and he was an astrologer. Yeah,
Oh,
look him up,
what a great
John
way to
Dee.
wrap this up. Love it.
Yeah, and he was. But anyway, he was also like an archaeologist. He would look at old monuments and
Ugh,
stuff. But
fascinated
when
with that.
the Spanish went on their peace and prosperity mission to Mexico, just kidding.
Yeah.
Some of the loot they brought back were these obsidian gazing mirrors, that the Aztecs had used. And John Dee came into one of them and he looked and he could see the spirits. So he set this up in his studio, and for years he carefully recorded all the spirits that, their interactions with the spirits through the mirror. You're going to love this story. Well, anyway, okay. He was also an early pioneer in the intelligence field. And I have some friends in intelligence, and they have said that still some of the principles that John Dee invented are still applicable in intelligence work. But he was an intelligence agent for Queen Elizabeth, and and she had a nickname for everybody, and her nickname for him was Eyes. Right now, at that time, mathematics was not yet clearly distinguished from magic. And for some reason, John Dee's favorite number was 7. Okay. And so when he signed his secret communications to Queen Elizabeth, he put 2 circles side by side. Then he did the 7 thing over and beside it, 007. John Dee was the origin of James Bond.
007.
As Fleming talks about in this article he did one, or like an interview we did one time. So this is something very deeply in our history and in our consciousness, but the religious authorities are not going to permit this one, right?
No.
Because then if you do your own thing, you might come against something that contradicts their ideology, which is all they care about. See?
I cannot believe how much I have in common with your way of thinking. I mean, just with the astronomy, the astrology, the philosophy, the psychology, just the whole philosophical way of looking at life. I could talk to you for another hour.
Likewise, this is great, friend.
We're going to have a part 2.
But you'll learn it at 80, Holly. You'll see what I mean. I'm past the age of politeness. It's what I mean is, it's like all these fanatics are trying to tell us what to do. I know, I mean, these folks are ning-nongs. They're not, I don't pay any attention to them. And I'm just going to speak my piece.
You do. You get to a certain age where it's like, I'm getting to that point where it's like, you know what? Don't indoctrinate me. Help me find my truth, but don't be my truth. And my truth isn't your truth. And my truth will probably change in 5 years from now, or maybe tomorrow. And that's okay too, right? That's the whole idea of being curious about life. But we've been so indoctrinated through the school system and the religious system and the society and social, etc. The books we can read and we can't read, and things being mainstreamed and not mainstream. Be curious that there is an answer to your question of, I'm lost. I feel, what's my passion? That's the biggest thing now, is what's my destiny? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Don't expect one person to give you that answer, but don't stop asking the question either.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's like, the great thing about knowledge is that we don't have much of it. And that what we have is pretty interesting.
Well, if there's anything anyone can take away from this, I mean, it's a plethora of information that's in there. I'm literally watch this over and over again, guys, because there's so much information in here. And I really hope you would have a time for a part 2 one day, because the stories that you have, they're not just stories, they're factual. You're very well read and very well versed, and you've got a lot of information. I've got a cousin who's much younger than I am as well, but is very well read and well versed and has the same philosophy that you have. But I want to thank you so much. If you've got one last thing, and I don't know how you could pick another one because you've said so many golden nuggets in this whole interview. What do you have to say to mankind right now?
Listening. What do I have to say to the folks listening? Well, if you're interested in the afterlife question, and if, for example, you've lost a loved one to death and so on, it's I can't try to persuade anybody else that there's an afterlife. But what I can say is that from my perspective, I give up. I've thought about this for 50 something years. I can't think my way out of it. There is, I gather, an afterlife. And that, um, so death, everybody, I guess, is afraid of death in some way. But I've talked to part of my practice for a long time was talking with people with fear of death. And I found that people have different things they fear. The fear for me is pain, right? I don't want any pain.
Same,
That's right.
same. Nobody
But
wants that.
in terms of obliteration, that's out the window. And so the thing about it is to focus on this life and to really try to learn. And then, it's all taken care of in the end. But mainly just for the folks listening, thank you so much for listening in. And thank you, um, Holly, for this opportunity. And like I said, I'm a little testy today because I just had
I
a,
love it. I love it.
yeah,
I
and
needed to
it's
hear
just,
this today. I needed to hear what you had to say. It's none of it's going to be edited out because whoever's
all right.
listening needs to hear it. And we all, we want to see the testy side because everybody is frustrated right now with the way
Yeah.
life is going. They can feel it, even if they
Ooh,
don't see it. They can feel some kind of uncomfortable control maybe happening. People are kind of doing it to each other. We got to stop. Just stop. Let
yeah.
people be authentically who
Yeah.
they really are.
That's right.
Because people are like, I don't know what to eat. I don't know what vitamins to take. I don't know if I
Yeah.
should walk or if I should be pumping iron. What religion do I
I know.
believe in?
It's
Who do
so
I
sad.
vote for? It's like, stop.
See what it is, so, Holly, the great virtue of education. I had 2 years, like I had two doctoral degrees plus 3 years of being a college professor before I was 31. And anybody my age can know there's something terribly wrong with that. Right? Like I spent my whole life with my nose in a book.
Yes.
But um, the nice thing that education does is that it makes you aware of your ignorance and that it gives you a tolerance of ambiguity.
Hmm.
It's like because if you're well educated, you realize that nobody knows much of anything. But if you think about the folks who didn't have any education, who, went graduated from high school and then went to work at the factory, depending on their pension, which Wall Street eventually took, and in many cases, their only talent is being white. And I'm sorry to say it, but it's bluntly true. And,
Was
they
a
grew
time.
up
Yeah.
in an environment, and now they're realizing that their kids can't go to the front of the employment line because they're white. And so they're furious and angry because they don't realize, like you and I do, that these things are not known. So, see, they think that somebody must know. And that's why they're not educated because education means realizing the limits of knowledge. And that's the sad thing that a lot of the people don't have, which you and I understand that knowledge is very limited. But most people see they don't have that education to show them.
I love it. I love it. And with the world that we live in, with the books and the internet and the libraries, we can educate ourselves. We can
Yeah,
find our own way to learn what we want to learn, what's necessary for us. I'm not
that's
poo-pooing
right.
education at all. The education, if you want to go out and get a degree, I've even worked with clients and I go, you have so much life experience, you don't need another certificate. Stop.
Yeah,
Just go
that's right.
do what you can do for people with your life
That's right.
experience. Because if you're not
That's right.
serving others and you're just
That's right.
sticking your head in and you
Lots.
just want that certificate, you're not
Gotcha.
using your life experience. Go help people
Gotcha. Well, let
too.
me tell you something. You'll be interested. All right. Last time I went to Europe, this was before COVID. I don't go to Europe anymore because I'm too old, but this was some years back. I was there and in Denmark, where I think it was in, but where it was this young psychiatrist, a woman from Denmark, and she had read about near death experiences and she had gotten a
Wonderful.
uh, a real interest in it. So she was kind of organizing a conference to come to her hospital about
Oh,
near-death experiences to go to
awesome.
the doctors and all. But when I met her, she was very forlorn. And you know how the Dutch are. I mean, the Danes are, you know, these are, it's not uptight, but they're very precise, right?
I'm
And
married
so
to a Dutch
anyway,
man. I can tell you that. And we're actually going
all
to
right,
Holland in
yeah, yeah,
January. I
there
love
you
it.
go, there you go. So this wonderful Danish woman had was suddenly thrown into a state of despair in organizing her conference because she had looked up on the internet one of the qualifications of one of the so-called experts on near-death experiences who she was thinking of inviting to the conference. And when she looked up this woman's alleged credentials, they came from a diploma mill in India. And the way the woman got her certificate was she submitted a saliva sample.
What?
This is shocking, but it happened. And what I'm getting at is it's,
No experience.
you don't have, it's, these things are very, very important. And to approach them flippantly, like this moron of a woman did, and hurting people with bringing this alleged message of happiness, and my point
No
is,
experience.
yeah, it's there's charlatans in this field just like there anything
Well,
else, and you have to be careful.
you said it exactly, because I've had clients that have had horrific life experiences, maybe even addiction along with it, or issues with their weight, or they've been through severe abuse, and they go, I feel like an imposter. How can I help people when I'm not
Yeah.
100% cured yet? I said,
Mhm.
if I want to lose a bunch of weight, do you think I want to go to a group where there's a bunch of skinny people who can eat anything they want and they're perfectly fit? No, I want to be with people who have the same issue that I have, and they're living with it, successfully living with
Yeah,
it and dealing with it day
there
by
you
day.
go.
You're the one who can help people more than somebody with a PhD about addiction who's never had
There
been
you
addicted
go.
to anything.
There you go. There you
You
go.
know?
It's like it's all, there's this woman talking about the most important topic of existence,
Near
and
death.
she's pretending she has some kind of scholarship behind it, but she got her degree from
So
submitting
tell
a
me
saliva sample.
you're the person who went to the hospital to talk to people? No.
I'm sorry.
Did she bring you on to talk
I
to
don't
them?
know who it was. I
Uh,
don't know who it was, but I can't use a computer, but I mean, it's just such a disgusting thing. Like
yeah.
some
Yeah.
charlatan has convinced people she's an expert on near-death experiences and then put this so-called degree down. And then when you look it up, it's a diploma mill in India from a saliva
I've
sample.
never heard of that
See,
before. That
yeah, it's
is
shocking,
scary.
isn't it?
That's
It's
scary.
shocking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that can happen. And you want to know what the proof behind,
There you go.
this who they are. Thank you
There you
so
go.
much, Raymond
Thank
Moody,
you,
Dr.
Holly.
Raymond
And
Moody.
again,
Thank
thanks to
you.
all the folks listening. This is just so great.
I had a blast. I had way more information than I ever expected. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you
And
so
maybe
much.
he'll agree to come on again, and
Oh, absolutely.
we could do a live and everybody could ask questions and whatnot. That would be a
Yeah,
riot.
sure. I'd
Thank you,
love to do that.
everybody. May the stars be with you and may all your dreams come true. Namaste.
Thank you. Goodbye.
There we go. Oh my
Thank you.